We're continuing our series called Reboot. And this will be the last message in this series. And it's been a good series. Nehemiah is one of my favorite books in the Bible. And speaking of rebooting, I was reading an article this week called The Great Reset. And this article really kind of captures what we've been talking about in this series, as we are all in some way or form resetting, we're rebooting, rebuilding our lives because of this great disruption that we have experienced over the last, almost 2 years now. I've completely lost count. But the article is talking about how people have basically pivoted and they've reset their lives. And we've all, no doubt, have done similar things. Many of us have moved. Shout out to the people who have come to Baltimore and are hanging with us, who moved to Baltimore. Some of us have changed jobs. Some of us are thinking about changing jobs. The rhythms have changed in our lives. Schools have changed in terms of where kids are going to school, and even the school rhythms and what we're doing with our kids in school. All of these things have shifted in our lives, and even the furthest extreme to just losses that we've all experienced. Some of us are trying to figure out how to move forward in our lives without loved ones that have been close to us. And so we've looked at this through a biblical lens in the life of Nehemiah, who did not experience a pandemic per se, but he did experience major disruption in his life. And he did experience, although it be indirectly, devastation of his people. And so we've asked questions over the last couple of weeks. What do you do when you experience life-altering moments? Or what do you do when life as you know it has been completely disrupted? How do you rebuild? How do you restart? How do you reboot? Where do you begin? And so week one, just a recap for those of you who haven't been with us, week one, we talked about when this happened to Nehemiah. Nehemiah didn't do what we normally do as humans, where we go into planning mode or we go into panic mode sometimes, and we're trying to figure out what to do, and we're putting plans together and we're processing how we're going to fix or address what is going on in our lives. Nehemiah didn't do that. Nehemiah, he first paused before he planned in order to pray so God could speak to him and give him direction. And then in week two, we talked about after you pause and after you pray and after you've gotten some direction, hopefully, then it's time to make a move. You actually got to do something. Some of us are good with the praying piece because that delays the activity that we actually need to be engaged in. So we're comfortable with just praying. And some of us are more comfortable with just jumping in without praying, and the activity is not maybe the best that it could be because we didn't get informed. But we talked about making a move or taking a step. And so this week, as we conclude this series, I want to talk about one thing that I know we all hate. We none of us love it, and it's inevitable in our lives, and it will no doubt be what we encounter, and it's opposition and adversity. Now, when I think about opposition, when I think about adversity, when I think about the resistance that is inevitable for us, I started to think about a name that maybe some of you have heard of, but maybe not familiar with, and some of you are not familiar with at all. There's a woman named Dorothy Height. Dorothy Height was one of the most influential yet unheralded civil rights leaders in our time. And she experienced constant disruption and opposition in her life. One, because she was a woman, and two, because she was black. And so she had two just weights that she constantly carried throughout her life that lended itself to the types of disruption that she would face. One very pivotal moment that I think helped shape her life was when she was a young woman and she had gotten accepted to Barnard College in New York. And she went to Barnard College and she showed up at the campus and she was turned away and denied because they said, Ms. Height, we know that you got accepted into this college, but we've actually met our quota for black people. And so we don't have a space for you. You will not be attending this college. And so in that moment, Dorothy Height said that she was too distraught to go home or to call home. And so she did the only thing that she knew to do. She got on the subway and she went to Manhattan, and she showed up with her acceptance letter to Barnard to another college called NYU. And she was admitted into NYU. And she went on to get a bachelor's and master's degree. But this became a trend in Dorothy Height's life when things happened and the resistance came and the opposition. Well, she just didn't sit still. She just didn't cry. She just didn't go home. She figured out how she needed to pivot and what she needed to do next. And so despite her great organizing skills that she was known for, despite her great oratorical skills that she was known for, she was regularly not credited and she was regularly not asked to speak. One of the greatest moments in the civil rights movement was 1963, the March on Washington. And many of us remember Dr. King, I Have a Dream speech, and we remember how big that moment was. But what we don't know is that Dorothy Height was one of the key organizers of that day. And if we look very closely and you go back and you look at video, you will see a few steps away, Dorothy Height, right near Dr. Martin Luther King. Once again, she's on the platform and she's got a proximity, but she doesn't have the opportunity to speak, even though she employed the leaders about allowing a woman to speak. But Dr. Height, she didn't allow this adversity or this opposition to stop her. She went on to address things like slave markets in New York City to the city council, where women would be gathered on the corner and they would be picked up by other women, white women in particular, to bring them to their homes, and they would be paid pennies on a dollar to work. She addressed things like Wednesdays in Mississippi, where she would bring a diverse group of black and white women to Mississippi to engage with the women in Mississippi. Even things like the pig bank, where families were given a pig, which would have been very significant for their stability. Several presidents sought her counsel. She got 2 of the highest civilian awards. You may not know Dr. Height and all of the things that she accomplished, but history cannot deny her impact. And this is why I love the story of Nehemiah. He was also a virtual unknown. His position was one of a cupbearer to a king. Basically, y'all, he was a taste tester to make sure that the king's stuff was good. That's not a heralded position. I don't know that that's what you aspire to be when you grow up, but this was the position that God had put him in. He didn't have a platform to speak. And there was a lot of opposition even to him speaking, because when you're in that position, you speak when you're spoken to. And why would a foreign king care about Nehemiah's people? So what would be the point to speaking up to the king anyway? It just would have been much easier to kill the idea before it even got started. And isn't that sometimes how we process as well? God has put something in our hearts. God has put something in our mind. And we start thinking about all of the opposition. We start thinking about all of the resistance. We start thinking about what people might say, what people might think. And so sometimes we kill the idea before we even get started. We resist ourselves. But Nehemiah, he made his move. He rolled the dice, and he overcame the first opposition that we normally face, which is internal. It's us. But now, as we fast forward in the story to Nehemiah chapter number 4, he's gotten over the internal opposition and resistance. Now he has to face external resistance. And so we pick it up in Nehemiah verse 4, starting at verse number 1. It says, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious. He mocked the Jews and before his colleagues and the powerful men of Samaria and said, what are these pathetic Jews doing? Can they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they ever finish? Can they bring these burnt stones back to life from the mounds of rubble? Then Tobiah the Ammonite, who was beside him, said, indeed, even if a fox climbed up what they are building, he would break down their stone wall. These are the words of Nehemiah. Listen, our God, for we are despised. Make their insults return on their own heads and let them be taken as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt or let their sin be erased from your sight, because they have angered the builders. So we rebuilt the wall until the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had the will to keep working. Just to bring some of us along who are not familiar with the story or who weren't with us the last couple of weeks, Nehemiah feels compelled to build a wall for his people. And this is significant because when a city doesn't have a wall protecting it, its people are vulnerable. And so Nehemiah was compelled to protect his people. Now, we talked about this before. Nehemiah is not a general contractor. He doesn't have an urban planning degree. I just told y'all he was a taste tester. So what makes Nehemiah think that he can do this? Well, he's got this stirring inside of him, and now he has opposition who's also questioning, who is this Nehemiah? Who are these Jews? Who do they think they are that they can rebuild this wall? I want to just tag this message with this title this weekend: Embrace the Resistance. Embrace the resistance. When we envision what we hope, resistance usually isn't what we think of. It usually isn't prominent in our mind. And even if we know that it's going to be challenging, we know that it's going to be tough, that's not what we focus on. Our hope and what we're looking at is the end product. We're excited about the end. We're not excited about what might be waiting for us in the middle. But there are long days. There are sleepless nights. There's doubt. There's fear. There's frustration. There's constant insecurity. And these are not things that we plan for. And even if we do think well about them, and even if we do have a plan for them, it's still very different once you face it. I love what Mike Tyson said, former heavyweight champion of the world. He said, everybody got a plan until you get hit in the mouth. And once we get hit in the mouth, then, it moves from theoretical to reality at that point. And sometimes, we're thinking well, we're not naive, but once we get that first hit, once we get that first opposition, then it's like, this is real now. It's finally gotten real for Nehemiah because, yes, he has overcome maybe the internal angst, and yes, he's gone 2,400 miles away from where he was, and now he's on the ground and he's on the scene, and it's real for him now. And so word is on the street that Nehemiah he's up to something. Right from the beginning, he's got these two guys, Sanballat and Tobiah, who are leaders of the resistance. And we'll come back to them in just a second, because there's some significant things that we need to understand about these two guys. But if you're taking notes this weekend, there are just three things that I want to point out that I think we can elevate from what we read today. Three things that I think have to be in our mindset if we're going to embrace the resistance, because embracing the resistance is a mindset within itself. But there are certain components to that mindset that I think we have to have in order to embrace it. Number one is you got to expect the resistance. You got to expect that it's going to happen. I don't know why, but as I was thinking about this first point, I was processing this whole idea of expecting resistance through the lens of science and the physical world. Just track with me for a second. Gravity and friction are forms of resistance in and around us that we live with every single day. But they're also forms of resistance that we've gotten used to because they also help us. Think about gravity. Gravity, it keeps us grounded and keeps us stable, and it keeps the world around us grounded. Even the solar system, it keeps that in order. So the gravity is necessary to actually keep us stable. Let's think about friction for just a second. Friction is that in-between force that prevents us from slipping and sliding. And it also allows us to grip or to take hold of some things. And I believe that resistance in our lives, metaphorically, does the same thing. Because sometimes the resistance needs to help keep us grounded so we don't get too high and mighty. Sometimes the resistance is good to help us keep perspective, keep a grip on what's actually happening in reality. So these things are good for us, along with allowing us or helping us to grow, to learn how to dig deep, and to produce points of reference in our lives, because we always go through resistance. We always go through certain things where we need to persevere through. And it's great when you can look back on times that you've already done that. But here's the thing, though. Oftentimes, the resistance comes from our own people. Sometimes the resistance comes from people that maybe you didn't expect, or maybe you hope would be for us, but they're not for us. And this is where Sanballat and Tobiah come in, because they're Samaritan officials. Okay, so the Samaritans were basically cousins of the Jews, but there was a divide in the family. Y'all ain't no drama like family drama. There was a divide. There was a divide between the Samaritans and the Jews. And listen, this is centuries old. Centuries old. Historically, if you go all the way back to Genesis, this had to do with Jacob's descendants and God blessing one and not blessing the other, and then they split as a result of that. And then Israel becomes a kingdom, but the kingdom itself splits. And so, the Jews didn't get down with the Samaritans, and the Samaritans didn't get down with the Jews. They basically from the same family, but they hating on one another. And when we think about the resistance that we all face, isn't that what we're constantly facing each and every day? Oh, I'm with this tribe, I'm with this party, I'm with these people, and we are talking or speaking in terms of unity, but we're not actually working on being unified with one another. And so this is something that is relevant to us today, this racial, ethnic, cultural divide that is in play here as Nehemiah is trying to uplift and build up a people. Some of his own people are like, yo, bro, who you think you are? And the reason we experience this and the reason we see this is because deep down, there's more of a propensity for the preservation of power over the promotion of unity. Because if there's going to be a promotion of unity, then I got to release some of my power. And so Sanballat and Tobiah, they are in position and they have authority. They've actually won up the people that they don't get down with. And so Nehemiah coming to build them up is threatening their authority. Listen, we don't have time to get into spiritual warfare, which is a real thing, but when you start engaging in things that are going to build up, that are going to lift up people, there's always going to be power and people in places who don't like that, who will resist that. We've got to expect that. And so Nehemiah expects it. We didn't read it, but in Nehemiah 2, Sanballat and Tobiah, they hear about this then. And so Nehemiah, what he does is he comes into the city And he decides at night, he doesn't take any of his officials with him. And he just kind of goes and inspects the wall and go. He didn't tell anybody what he was doing. He didn't come in making an announcement or what he was going to do. He just went to go check it out and see, because he knew what time it was. He did this, it says, over the cover of night. And sometimes we just got to be careful and keep what God has given to us right here and not make an announcement because we don't want to increase the resistance that we already got to face. All right, so point number one, we got to expect the resistance. Point number two, you're not by yourself in the fight against resistance. Sanballat and Tobiah, they begin to mock and insult Nehemiah. They start stirring up stuff. But I love Nehemiah's response. Nehemiah realizes that it's not his job to fight them. It's not his job. He recognizes that their mocking and the insults are a distraction. So what does he do? He prays to God and he says, God, listen, you better get them because they are up against what you have called me to do. So let me just pause right now and just ask you to address them, carry them off into the plunder. Don't let none of this stuff come to pass. I need you to handle this. And this is a significant point to understand because I think we spend too much time addressing people that don't need to be addressed. I think we spend way too much time and way too much energy fighting against words and different things that are said that have nothing to do with what we have. It's just a distraction. That's all it is. Nehemiah's like, God, I need you to handle this, and he doesn't allow himself to get caught up. Can I just tell you this? Most of the things that we are up against, they just fall into this category of what I call suggestive content. That's it. It's just a suggestion. It's suggestive content that's really just trying to poke at you, that's really just trying to draw you in, that's really just trying to get your attention to make you do something that maybe you ordinarily wouldn't do. That's all it is. It's just a suggestion. It's like if we go all the way back to the Garden of Eden and the conversation that the serpent had with Eve, all it was a distraction. Did God really say you can't eat that? It was a distraction. And we have to learn how not to entertain distractions. The he said, the she said, the ha made you look, the sideways energy. We got to not engage in that. And in this rebooting season, we don't have time for that. And Nehemiah didn't have time for that. So let's be better about tapping into the reinforcement that we have been given access to through prayer, which is what Nehemiah does. And let's stop reacting to people and be conditioned to respond in prayer. So number one, we've got to expect the resistance. Number two, we got to realize that we don't have to fight this resistance ourselves. And then number three, we have to keep working despite the resistance. Verse number 6, I love what Nehemiah says. The people had the will to keep working. At some point, your will is going to be tested. And do you have the mindset to keep pushing? Do you have the internal fortitude to dig deep? And I love what the Hebrew word for will is. It's lave, and it means heart and mind of inner man. So the people, their will, their heart and their mind internally was to work, was to keep working despite the resistance. I was reading this article called The Do-Over by George S. Everly Jr. And he's talking in this article about mastering adversity. And I love what he says. He says, masters of adversity exercise the power of belief by attempting to change the things over which they have control, primarily their own actions, and ignoring those they don't. Giving attention to the things that you can change, the things that you can, which is you. Your attitude and your actions, that's all you have control over. And I just want to pause right here because I talk to a lot of particularly young people about being courageous and stepping into things and wanting things to change. And one of the things that always comes up, and it's the same things we do as adults, is, well, I don't want to say anything because it's not going to change anything. Well, who told us that it was our job to make a person change? Who told us that it was our responsibility to make? No, it's our responsibility to step into it. It's God's responsibility to activate the change and the person's responsibility to respond. But people who are masters of adversity, they focus only on the things that they can change. This reminds me of so many stories that we love. Stories that inspire us. One of those stories for me is the story of Jesse Owens. And I spent some time in Berlin and was able to go to Olympic Stadium where Jesse Owens won those 4 gold medals. And it's such an amazing, they have a street called Jesse Owens Way now. And when you understand the history and the significance of this moment, like Jesse was at a time in 1936, during, when the Olympics was coming in 1936 to Berlin, there was a lot of oppression happening in the United States, and there's still a lot of segregation. And Jesse is this great sprinter, and he has the opportunity to go to the Olympics. And there was a lot of controversy around this Olympics because Hitler, the Nazi leader of Germany, is trying to use the Olympics to show the strength and the might of Nazi Germany, that they are indeed supreme and superior. And so Jesse is facing all of this pressure from his people at home and the NAACP said, you cannot go and run. We've got too much stuff that we're fighting for here, and he's got internal things going on with this team at school and all of these things. But Jesse decides that I can only control one thing, and that's running. And maybe if I go and I run and I do what I know that I can do, I can upstage what Hitler is trying to do. And maybe I can't change what's happening in Germany. And maybe I don't have the influence to stop the oppression that's happening there. But what I can do is stand on the platform and show that I will not be moved. I'm just going to control what I can control. And this is exactly what happens. Jesse completely upstages what Hitler is planning to do to show the superiority of Nazi Germany. And so maybe you're not going to run for a political office. Or maybe you don't have the influence of many that you see who have platforms. But there are decisions that you can make. And there are things that you can control. And what is God asking you to do? Are you responding to that? Deep down in this rebooting season, God is stirring some of us. And there are days when the resistance is going to be challenging. But I love what Nehemiah did. He focused on what he could control. And if we read further on in chapter number 4, listen, this ain't about just laying down. No, Nehemiah said, oh, okay, y'all going to resist us? Y'all going to threaten us? This is what we're going to do. We're going to arm ourselves while we work. The scriptures say that Nehemiah equipped everybody with weapons. The people who were bringing the supplies, they had weapons. The people who were building the wall, they had weapons. It also said they worked with one hand and they had their hand on the sword as well. We got to be smart about this thing too now. We got to equip and protect ourselves, but we can control what we can control. That's it. We got to stay alert. We got to stay ready. And the reason they were able to do this is because they had a deep belief that God would be with them. And as a matter of fact, Nehemiah said, when y'all hear this horn, it's not a horn that is the sound of an alarm. It's a horn that symbolizes that God is with us. So when the opposition comes, we sound this horn. That's to let you know that God is getting ready to fight with us as we fight. So in this reboot season, let's not focus on the resistance. Let's focus on our reactions that we can control. Let me see if I can land the plane for us this weekend and let us be on our way. The dominant theological narrative throughout the book of Nehemiah is about covenant renewal. Nehemiah knows that God has made a covenant with his people. And Nehemiah is saying, hey, maybe I need to be an active ingredient in helping to bring this renewal. Many of us see the things that are happening right in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our cities, and maybe God wants to use us for renewal. That was how Nehemiah was being stirred. He understood this that God wants to renew. He also understood justice and righteousness, which is a major theme as well throughout Nehemiah, to correct the abuses that were happening, the misconduct that was happening, all of these things that we currently see in our cultural context as well. And the story of the Bible, which I mentioned earlier, is about God being on mission to restore, redeem, and reconcile. And if we're going to be on mission with him, that is what we are actively embodying as well. We pursue justice and righteousness, and it's about restoring what is broken, restoring what has gone astray, and making it right again, and establishing right relationships with one another. That's why in the Old Testament, you never see the term justice without righteousness. The two are one. They're the same. It's justice and righteousness. And so in this reboot season, that's what we're called to do. It's not about capitalizing and creating opportunities for our own thriving. It's not about how we can reset the deck to help ourselves out or to promote ourselves. No, that's not what it's about. And I love, circling back to Dorothy Height, I love what she said when it was asked of her about how she was regularly pushed down and she was not heralded and she was not given the credit that she deserved. Listen to what she said. She said the task at hand was far less about personal limelight than it was about collective struggle. I want to highlight collective struggle, because when we think about doing the things that maybe God is stirring us to, sometimes we don't think about it in terms of joining into the struggle, because our mindset a lot of times in this cultural context we're in, particularly in the West, is individual triumph. We're not thinking about collective struggle. I'll give you money. I'll cheer you on. I don't know if I want to carry that with you. I'm a little busy. That's a little hard. That's not really, that's a little too messy for me. But embracing the resistance is not a testament to our own individual success, but it's God at work in and through us, get this part, on behalf of others. God at work in and through us on behalf of others. So we have to embrace the resistance, because it's not about us breaking through, it's about others breaking through with us, which is what Nehemiah was all about. The story of Nehemiah is reflective of a God who loves, who repairs, who restores, and he can use anyone who's fully submitted to him. The size and the scale of the task doesn't matter. Our qualifications don't matter. Neither does the adversity, the opposition, or the resistance. As a matter of fact, the resistance is all a part of God's plan anyway. A plan to grow us and a plan to show off his glory and his love. So as we're rebooting, in whatever way that we're rebooting, Maybe we're trying to reboot, and it's like our computer, the little pinwheel just keeps spinning, and it's like, I'm trying to reboot, but nothing is happening. Even if you're there, you're not even sure. Let's remember Nehemiah's example. Let's pray. Let the prayer inform our actions, because we gotta get to work. And let's understand that we're going to have resistance. Or we can embrace the resistance because God is with us.